Great to see you here. In this short video, I will talk about communication management. What is communications management about? What are the communication skills we are talking about? We also look at the element of communication lines, how they increase when there are more people we have to communicate with, and also the crash point. A last element in this presentation is about the sender-receiver model. What are we including in communications? Well, communication management is very important, and it's also important to deal with it in a proper way. Sometimes people talk about mushrooming. Mushrooming communication is basically when people are hiding and not really communicating. It's about avoiding communication, and the mushrooming term comes from the fact that mushrooms typically grow in the dark. Now, when we look at communication management, we also have the planning step in it. What are the ways we're going to manage communications? What are the techniques we are using? Communication is about keeping the stakeholders informed about the project progress, and we have different types of communication that can be used. We call it formal, informal, written, and formal communications. Communications every time should be proactive, accurate, and timely. So it's very important to keep the people informed, because most of the problems that happen is when the people don't know what's happening with the project. Certainly when we are in some situations when there are things not working the way we want, or there are issues, we should communicate with the people very quickly. When I was in my function in AT&T as an account director, one of the elements when I communicated with the people was to tell them we have a problem. And the first question that came back from the people was, how long do you know that there is a problem? Communicating about problems or issues is very important, because if you don't do it, it will create much more problems than you do it from the beginning. Also, communicating about issues that are happening or that are shown in your reports will give the possibility to both parties to find a solution in case the problem cannot be resolved. Not sharing elements about issues and problems or sharing them too late will lead to a loss of trust between the parties, and trust can be regained, but it's very difficult, and once something happened, it can be basically breaking the relationship. When we look at the project manager and communications, it's the most important skill set, and most of the project manager's time is invested in it. Typically, we can estimate that 90% of the project manager's time is about communication, with 50% internally with the team. For large projects, the time spent on communication can be very important. Now, we also have to consider the level of detail, and we have to adjust it to the people we are talking to. When we are sharing too many details to people higher in the hierarchy, it may create paralysis. We call it analysis paralysis. So it's very important to communicate the elements to the people, and if they want to know more, we can provide those details. Now, the project manager should always be in control of the communication process, and for large or important projects, a very strong communication plan may be needed. Another element which I didn't mention on this slide is what we call in communications or information sharing, what is need to know. When you look at the elements, when somebody has a high function, it doesn't mean that that person has to know everything. Need to know means that the people who has access to information will only receive the information that is relevant for that person. For example, a CTO should not be given confidential financial information about the company. There are different things that you have to be careful about. Also, projects are in fact confidential. We're doing something that can be revolutionary, and sharing the information with too many people would lead to information breaches. And of course, the effects of that can be very important to the company. When we look at the processes, we have in fact, first of all, the initiation. Initiation, there is no communication here, but when we go to planning, we see that we talk about the plan communications management. Here we define the rules, how we will deal with communications and the tools that we are using. In execution, we manage the communications, we are dealing with them, we are working on them, we are sharing the information. And during monitoring and control, we monitor the communications. We see if the communications are done properly and what do we have to adjust to improve the quality of the communications. And in the closing, we don't have any communication processes here. Let's have a look at some key concepts in communication management. Communications is about exchange of information, and it can also be intended voluntarily. PMI states that this is something, but I personally do not agree with this. So it's intended, it should be involuntary, and that's a topic to be considered. Information can be changed using or exchanged using different formats, written, spoken, formal, using gestures and things like that. But we have to be careful that we use a good selection of words to express our ideas and to communicate with the people. Now, there are different means of transmission that we can use, and we can also consider it internally, externally, formal, informal, hierarchically focused, official, unofficial, written, and oral. Communication is essential to create a successful project or program, and it is shared by words, all kinds of ways to deal when we are communicating with people. When we are communicating person to person, we have all dimensions of communications, while when you're on the phone or when we are video conferencing, when we are writing or sending emails, we lose certain dimensions of the communication. Now, the first thing to do is to develop a strategy and build a plan to show or to share the relative content to the people. And we have to define that. So it's very important to define how and why and when we are going to share information and who is going to receive information about the project. When we talk about communication, there is what we call the 5 C's. First of all, correct spelling and grammar. Now, when you are communicating in a language that is not your native language, you may ask somebody to correct for errors. We already have some elements that we can use, but sometimes things have to be clarified, and it's certainly an issue when we're dealing with people. Now we have to try to express our ideas as concise as possible, and too many words, too much information will confuse the person who's receiving the message. Clear purpose and expression that we need. We have to know who is the receiver of the message. Now we have to take into account knowledge and level. Some people may know all the details you're talking about, but if you're working on a very complex project, some people may not understand all the technical issues related to the topic that you are addressing. You have to have a coherent, logical flow of ideas, building the idea, sharing the information in a structured and logical way will help the people to understand what's going on. And this is sometimes, it also depends on the culture. Some people are communicating in a different way, and communication is not easy. We have to look at the control of the flow of the words, use creative and clear ways to present the ideas. Graphics may be very interesting. A picture tells more than 1,000 words. It may be very relevant to have a look how to communicate with the people, what's the most efficient way, and you may have to adjust it to the people you're talking to. So everybody may have a different way to understand what you want to say in the best way. When we look at main communication skills, we talk about active listening. We have to keep the listener engaged, summarize the ideas. We also talk about awareness of cultural and personal differences. In some cultures, the communication is different. You may have a problem just because you don't understand the culture, and this can be a very important problem in let's say in communication, and you have to be open to it. If there are some cultural issues, you should address them and talk about it. And it's very difficult to identify the cultural issues. Sometimes we take things personally. Now we have to identify, setting and managing stakeholder expectations. When people sell something, people look at a project, they say, oh wow, and everything is possible. But once you start working on a project, you have to share with the people how this project will be going. What are you doing? What are the possibilities? What can they expect and what can they not expect? It may be in the beginning that the customer or the project sponsor may not be really happy, but it's very important to be clear about the things, to say what is actually possible. Making promises that cannot be met will lead to issues, will lead to a loss of trust. Enhancement of skills, of course, we look at skills that you have to enhance. We can have courses, we can have different sessions, we can listen to people, we can learn from them. So it's basically very important that we build our skills, that we enhance them where we feel the need. And when we are dealing in a project, we will meet people with a lot more experience, and from those people you can learn about how to increase your communication efficiency. Another element in communication is about communication lines. Now, how many people are around you and what are the possible communication lines that exist? One person, well, it's alone. Once you have two people, you have one communication line. When you have three people, you have three communication lines. When you have a fourth person, you add three communications lines. And you see, the more people you add, the more communication lines are added. Now, basically, we have to deal with the official communication lines. So there are official communication lines that exist. And we can calculate the number of communication lines with the formula n times n minus 1 divided by 2. So basically, when we have 10 people, we have 45 possible communication lines. And you see, when the number of people is increasing, the number of communication lines is increasing a lot faster. Of course, we have to see, when you look at typical teams, teams are 3 people up to 10 people, which is still manageable. Now, when we look at stakeholders and their effect on duration, we have the crash point topic. The crash point topic means, well, we first add more people and the duration is in fact reduced linearly. When you put more people together, and you may have seen that when you put more people together, they start disturbing each other. And it means that you leave the linear zone. You add more people, but the efficiency of the people decreases. And we continue like that. And we see at the crash point, we come to a minimum. And when we add more people there, we increase the duration. People are disturbing each other. So it's very important to try to stay to the left-hand side of the crash point. Although in this case, 4 or 5, what happens here when we add when we have 4 people and we add a 5th person, we still see that we have a reduction of the duration. Nevertheless, the efficiency is a lot less, which means that the cost of the activity will increase. And here we have to make a decision related to the triple constraint. What is our constraint? Is it cost or is it time? When it's cost, I will say I will stay with 4 people, but if it's time, I will go to 5 people. Very interesting point of view here. It's a concept how we deal with this, and it's like a lot of things that we are doing. When there are too many people working on an activity, we will see that the efficiency of the people will decrease, and in some cases it will lead to an increase of the duration or even a stagnation. Another element related to communication is what we call the sender-receiver model. The sender is sending a message to the receiver. Now, there may be noise. There may be some things, and we've seen it in some presentations online. Sometimes it's very difficult to hear the person because of all kinds of technical issues, bad internet connection, noise around, and when people are not muted on a Zoom call, for example, it creates a lot of problems to understand. Now, when the sender is the person who's encoding the message, is selecting a method and sending the message, and you have to confirm the receipt, and you have to verify the understanding. Did you understand what I was saying? So basically, the receiver decodes the message, confirms the receipt, restates the message to confirm, and then you can see or verify that the message was understood properly. So basically, there are a lot of things here, and that noise may not only be just noise on a communication, it may be pronunciation, it may be knowledge of the language, it may be cultural differences, and so on. So basically, this was a presentation related to some elements of communication. Communication is very important, and as a project manager, you should try to improve the way you communicate and learn how to improve the communication between the different people. So that was it for this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you, and bye-bye.